I have been looking forward to this conversation with Terry Crist, Pastor Terry Crist, of course, here, Unscripted Season 4. We're in the Birmingham Dream Center. Thanks for being with us.
Wow. Thank you for the invitation. And how extraordinary is this facility? Seeing everything that you're doing right here on the property just reminds me of the importance of ministering to people holistically. That if we can address everything as you're doing, feeding people, caring for them emotionally, helping to address their physical needs, you're setting up a community for a win, and you're setting them up to know Jesus.
It is fun being here. I want to be here with you because this is your heart about loving people and doing everything you can to see people as Jesus sees them. We try to do that here at the Dream Center. We got Christ Health Center, and got the Live Oak Mental Development, of course, our servant leadership. So we're in this community based on, the generosity of people. We have a generous church. You have a generous church. People give to make a difference. I thank God for Pastor Chris, his leadership, his vision to take this firehouse and to turn it into a dream center. To make a difference in this community has been huge. And that's one of your heartbeats. I mean, you love people, your churches love people, City of Grace with a name like that for a church. I mean, my goodness, you love people. So, man, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being a part of this. And thanks for all of your support for ARC. You've always been so supportive.
I just want to say it's an honor to support ARC. You describe generosity, and as you typically do in your humble and encouraging style, you attribute that to other people. But, so much of the heart and soul of the ARC has been formed by who you are. And now that you're leading it, I'm excited about that. I walked into your offices and saw that sign on the wall. Everyone needs family. And I thought, that's not just a statement of observation, but it's a statement of intention. I came to the ARC conference some 10, 12 years ago and realized that this is a loving family, a faithful family. You guys are in a pastor's corner. You are champions of the local church, and you're really making a significant difference. And I'm grateful for you, grateful for what you do, not just for church planners, but for all pastors in general. So thank you.
Well, good leadership. And you and your wife have led City of Grace. Planted it in 2000?
2000.
My goodness. And church planters.
Yes.
Church planters extraordinary.
5 generations of Pentecostal history in our family and 3 generations of church planters.
And you and Judith planted it together. Y'all always been in this thing together.
We do everything together.
Yeah.
We do.
That's what I love about you. You can sense that when we talk, when you share, you're always deferring back to her, referring back to y'all's leadership, leading the church, planting the church.
I think it's essential, and I think we need to be aware of the fact that we do plant churches together. Even if a husband and wife doesn't do the same thing vocationally.
100%.
I've realized over the years that we have young leaders who have come up under our leadership in the church that we serve, where a husband may feel called to plant and a wife may be in business. She may be a teacher, an educator. It's still a family initiative. It's a family effort. And I think that the joys of a family are multiplied when we're working together, co-laboring together to build healthy and flourishing churches.
So tell me about the name.
City
I love
of
that
Grace.
name.
Well, City of Grace actually was born in 2000 in Scottsdale, Arizona. It was mine and Judith's 3rd church plant. So we're PKs, and I will always self-identify as being a PK and a church planter. Because I don't know when you outgrow either.
Neither.
I feel like I'm the Dick Clark of PKs these days. I'm the old kid who says I'm a PK, but it's just deeply ingrained into my psyche and my identity. And then when it comes to church planting, I don't know when you cease to be a church planter. I think it's a calling, something you embrace. It becomes an identity. And I don't know if you ever go from one Sunday to the next saying, hey, we're a planter, to now we're planted. I mean, I feel like we're always planting, and especially in a post-COVID world, we're replanting right within our own plants. So we started in 2000.
Okay.
Brought a little church planting team from our previous plant and just settled into the neighborhood. Began meeting people, coached boys and girls club basketball and sharing a faith. And for 9 months, we built relationships with neighbors.
Wow.
Without a public service. And
so planted in 2000?
9 months. And then we launched in 2000,
Okay.
mid-2000. And a church was formed.
City of Grace.
City of Grace.
So when you think about church planters in the world that we're living in now, you get to talk to them, I get to talk to them. We spend time coaching them, we spend time encouraging them. They visit your church now. You're around them, whether it's at a conference or everywhere you go and speak, you'll run into somebody who says, I want to do what you did.
Yeah.
What is your advice to church planters now?
Well, you guys have the church planting world dialed in, so I hesitate to speak into that. I come from a church planting environment with my dad and my granddad, where it was just a ground and pound game.
Is it 5 generations?
5 generations deep into Pentecostalism and 3 generations deep into church planting. And back then, it was simply a matter of embracing your calling, feeling a connection to a community or a city, and then just going in and doing it the old-fashioned way.
Yep.
Door to door,
Yeah.
conversation to conversation. And what I respect so much about the Ark is that you guys have done the hard work on behalf of church planters around the world to decipher some things, to get a handle on how to set them up for success and set them up to reach their communities. So for me, when I talk to church planters in today's world, I think fundamentally it begins with a calling. I think I could make a theological case for the fact that church planting is wrapped up within an apostolic function.
Yeah.
And so it's not just teaching, it's not just pastoring, it's not just evangelizing, but there's a grace to plant. There's a grace to go into a community and do the hard yards and faithfully carve something out of a rock. So I think they need that grace. They need to identify the grace. And then, of course, getting input into today's world and where can you plant and reach people who aren't being preached? Because sometimes we get tunnel vision. We fall in love with the zip code, we fall in love with a neighborhood, fall in love with the lifestyle.
Yeah, there's good restaurants.
And good restaurants.
It's a cool place.
Yeah.
It's like, man, that's going to wear off because you're going to eventually be there with people.
Right.
Caring for people, loving people,
Yeah.
going through the hard work with people. You've had longevity in ministry, you and your wife. What have you attribute the longevity of ministry, you and your wife together, building church, champion people, developing leaders, lifelong learner, reaching the world? My goodness, I think you've been in 50, 60 nations around the world ministering. What's the longevity? What has been longevity for you?
Well, this may sound like an oversimplification, but it's true. I'm acutely aware of the fact that one day I'm going to stand before Jesus. And I'm not doing this to my own glory or benefit or my own, portfolio. I'm not building a brand. I'm not doing something that will even be about legacy for me. That's sort of maybe in the back of my mind.
Sure.
But I'm mindful of the fact that there's going to come a day when I want to hear well done. And the only way you hear well done is if you do well.
Yeah.
And so during the hard times, during the difficult times, even during 2020 and all that happened in the world, Judith and I came back to the fact that we didn't call ourselves, we were called by God. And coming out of COVID, there were months when we were gathering exclusively online, and none of us really knew what we were returning on site to.
Sure.
In those early days, we thought the planet was on fire, and we'd never recover.
What would be left?
Exactly. We're going to, have the 144,000 out of the book of Revelation left. And so but we came back to this. Whether we return back to a church of 8,000 or 80 people, that's not what it's about. It's about doing well, serving Jesus, glorifying God, and being faithful to our mission. We plant, another waters, God gives the increase. And I can't control the harvest. I can't control the outcome, but I can control my faithfulness. And I think faithfulness leads to longevity. Yeah.
I want to talk in a minute about something that you've written, because you're an author. And I think the message that you have right now, that the book that's been released, is huge. But we spent some time together yesterday just talking ministry, talking life, the journey. And several times, I told my wife this last night. I said, you know what I love about Terry is you don't talk to him long where he doesn't mention his wife. Doing ministry together. Obviously, y'all have different gifting, different functions in what you do,
right?
And where you complement one another, where you're a blessing to one another. But there's wisdom that, because a lot of times we were talking about wisdom decisions, and you were saying Judith heard, Judith spoke. So tell me about how y'all have done ministry together. Where all these, y'all been married how long?
40 years.
40 years. So
40 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you got me beat by a few.
40 years.
So
and
40 years of doing ministry.
From day one. In fact, growing up in a model where the pastor's wife fit a certain role, more often than not played the piano, and, cared for her husband.
You got generations of it.
Generations of that. And it's still prevalent in the church world. Not so much in our church world, but in the church world. And I just caught a glimpse of a better way. I caught a glimpse of a partnership that could be had, and realized that, with whatever gifts and callings and abilities God has entrusted into me, that they're multiplied in marriage. They're multiplied in partnership. So I recall going to my dad, who was a pastor, and saying, I'd been married a few months.
Right.
And I said, Dad, I really feel like Judith has a call on her life, and would you give her a midweek service? And I could see him swallow in slow motion with this big
her to speak.
Hard swallow.
So you're asking her to
exactly.
Could she speak on a Wednesday night?
On a Wednesday night.
Okay.
And that just wasn't customary. I mean, we had women in ministry, but they were always missionaries and so,
song leader.
Exactly, a song leader. And so he gave her an opportunity to speak on a Wednesday night.
It says a lot about your dad.
It does. And we all sat there, just watching the grace that was unfolding in this extraordinary gift. And so our roles are a partnership, and it's not symbolic, it's not performative.
Right.
She's not my partner, but not really my partner. She's not my co-pastor, but really. I mean, we genuinely work together. And that isn't always easy.
Right.
When it's good, it's great. And when it's not, you got to work at it.
Yeah.
And so, but we've made it a priority because the benefit of that mutuality in ministry has been very, very clearly seen in the church and in raising up leaders and multiplying ourselves.
Well, you can see it in how the church has grown and how you have multiple locations, the different things you're doing in Vegas now, other locations, the things that have grown and mushroomed. And we were talking yesterday about you being able to, a key thing right now, raising up sons and daughters, raising up couples that are campus pastors or holding some of, toting some of the water of ministry, whether it's in the student ministries, it's in all the different things that you guys are building around the world. And so that's important to y'all, is modeling it so that you can raise up next generation.
Absolutely, and I firmly believe that every couple is in ministry together, even if they don't receive pay from ministry. So, and I have to allow for that, because in today's world, you have one spouse or the other that is in marketplace ministry. Right. And so not every couple will do exactly what we do, but fundamentally, this is a family calling. There's a family grace, and every couple needs to early on figure out how can we partner together, even if one or the other are vocationally engaged somewhere else.
Yeah, you see a lot of church planters that are like that. Maybe their wife is working another job while they're planting, or the husband is bivocational or vice versa. I know when Dylan and we got married, we were doing youth ministry. She was teaching school, but she was still doing youth ministry. And then we started our church. She was working out at a hospital. I was cutting grass, but we were still taking care of the ministry together, even though we had all these different expressions and vocations, so that we could, have income. And a lot of church planters are doing it. And sometimes I'll talk to a church planter, they're a little frustrated by that. But I'll always tell them to enjoy those years, to embrace those moments, because you deal with what you have.
I'd like to also encourage church planters to see bivocational life and ministry as an opportunity.
Yes.
Because sometimes we see it as a burden. We see it as something we want to quickly get past and get into full-time vocational ministry.
Exactly.
And I think of guys that we know across the nation. I think of a Bishop Bronner, that you wouldn't necessarily think of bivocational ministry, but the brother's bivocational through his business initiatives. Think of Bishop Jakes. Bishop Jakes is fundamentally bivocational. He's got like 15 vocations. But a lot of young leaders and church planners think, man, I just got to get out of the vocational life into, ministry as a profession, so to speak, or as a vocation. And I think we miss opportunities. And I also think in the shifts that have taken place in today's world, there will be a lot of pastors that are fruitful and flourish and are always bivocational. And we need to affirm that. We need to applaud that. We need to say, if that's the grace that God has for you, then He's put you there. He's put you there as a Daniel in Babylon, as a Joseph in Egypt, as a Paul in Rome. Look for the opportunity, because you're in a field, a rich, rich field, where you can plant a harvest and reap a harvest in ways that some of us who aren't in that field can't.
I remember we used to talk about being bivocational. It's like 2 part-time. No. Everything you're doing is full-time these days. You're going to plant a church, it's full-time. And if you've got to go cut grass, that's going to be full-time. You got kids, that's going to be full-time. Because you're trying not to compartmentalize your life. You just realize this is the life we have. We're going to put Jesus as priority, and then our marriage, and then our kids, and then the ministry will flourish out of it. I've got a good father-in-law that always communicates to me, hey, your ministry is your marriage is your ministry. Everything flows out of those things. So I've been grateful for that kind of base camp. And being married 35 years or 40 years, you're constantly reminded about those priorities. As you've built, traveled, different seasons of your life, how have you kept priorities, disciplines, spiritual life at the peak of all you do? That's the big summit.
Yeah, well, there's a need for constant mindfulness, meaning that I don't know if you ever really master that. You know, there's the old statement, I think Andy Stanley made it, that it's a tension to manage, not a problem to solve. And so I think there are so many things in our lives that we just have to live with that tension. And so I have to be mindful of, first of all, the importance of my devotional life, my spiritual formation. If I'm not being formed for God's pleasure, then it's hard to participate in the formation of a people for God's pleasure. If I'm not continually becoming like Jesus, it's hard to engage in seeing people become like Jesus. So that's why I love that statement, everyone needs a family. Because if I'm not leaning into family as a leader to be a part, it's hard to then say to the people that I serve, you need to be in family. So I think that we only give what we've received. We only impart what we've received. And so I have to be mindful of my spiritual life, my spiritual devotion, the constant formation of my soul, the areas within me that just aren't like Jesus, that I have to be faithfully aware of.
It can drift in a hurry.
Truthful. You got to be truthful with yourself, don't you? Because there's nobody that knows you like you. And if you smoke yourself, if you're dishonest with yourself, then you don't really have a lot of hope of growing or changing in those areas. So when I look in the mirror, I have to look in the mirror and say, okay, I'm graced, I'm called, I'm gifted. There's all of these things. But at the same time, here's some opportunities for Terry to continue growing. And there are a lot of them. I want to say a lot of them. In fact, I think the older I become at 58, 4 decades in ministry, the more I become aware of the areas of growth that are needed in my life than I was aware of 40 years ago. 40 years ago, it was just like, I'm going to serve God and change the world.
Gifted, strong. I got this. Y'all get out the way. I'm about to light this whole world on fire. I was in my devotion this morning, and it was the same thing. It feels like I'm 59, so I've become very aware of where I lack, my deficits. And I was reading a little devotion about thankfulness. And it's like, gosh, you never complete that. That's not a box to check. And again, I took some time this morning and began to thank Him for my wife, my kids, Pastor Chris, the church, ARC, friends, relationships. Because again, it's not something you achieve in your, okay, I've done thankfulness, I don't have to do that anymore. I've checked the box of being grateful. You know, no, I've got to keep climbing that summit to continue to live a life of thanksgiving to God and for His blessings and for, you know, the opportunities to minister to people, to care. I mean, just riding up on this property, I thought again how thankful I am for the generous people that create space so that we can make an impact in this neighborhood. So that somebody can come here today that doesn't have health care opportunities, that maybe has food shortage in their life, that has reduced opportunities with being able to understand why they think the way they think or the struggle that they have. And we're able to provide that service. There are so many things you can be thankful for in a world that so often can be mean.
Yeah. Well, I think deficits can lead to either disappointment and discouragement, or deficits can lead to dependency.
Yeah.
And our lives were never meant to be lived independent of the life source. And so in seeing who we are for who we are, it should push us to Jesus. And I think of great leaders like the Apostle Paul, you know, who shaped the canon of Scripture under the New Covenant and his complete dependency on Jesus. I don't want to ever outgrow that. The older I become and the longer that I lead, the closer I want to draw to Jesus, the more grace that I want to draw upon for my life, so that in being formed, I can again engage in the formation of other people for God's pleasure and purpose.
And you've become, I mean, you achieve academics too. I mean, just the accomplishments that you've made even the past recent years of growing in that space in your life. Do I need to call you doctor today?
You don't have to.
Okay, I didn't know if I need to call you doctor.
I only required Judith to call me doctor.
But bad joke. So tell me about how you've been able to climb the mountain of academics, but at the same time have this utter dependence and awareness of I just need Jesus.
All comes back to the same thing.
Work me through that.
Yeah, it's a matter of growing in Him. So the pursuit of knowledge, the pursuit of a theological understanding, for me, relates back to formation. Relates back to knowing Jesus better. Yeah, I don't study the Scriptures to be able to beat others at trivial pursuit. I don't even know if that's
a good debater
anymore. Yeah, it's not a matter
of
winning
people
arguments.
Online.
I could care less about winning arguments. I want to win people. And you can win arguments and lose people.
Yeah, you can.
But it's really about, again, growing in your soul, growing in who God has created you to be, and primarily growing in your relationship to Jesus.
And
the
so
deeper
recently,
I dig into the Scriptures, the more I see Jesus on every page, in every verse, in every sentence, in every line. And in beholding Him, we then become transformed into His image. So I don't study for the sake of mastering dead letter. I study for the sake of embracing a living Word. And we know who the living Word is.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Unscripted. We just want to take a brief moment to say thank you to Convoy of Hope for making this episode possible. Convoy of Hope serves around the world from disaster relief, feeding programs in war zones, and they do so many things with women's empowerment. They have served more than 163 million people since 1994. That's amazing. And are experts in resourcing and mobilizing the local church of all sizes to meet the needs of their community. Whether it's organizing an event or sponsoring families in need, there are so many opportunities for all of us to work together with them and to make a difference. Make sure to check them out on our website, arcchurches.com/partners, to learn more about how to get involved with Convoy, as you can access right there free resources as they prepared for the ARC family. So I think you'll enjoy it. Thanks a lot.
So you recently, was it an MDiv? What was it you just obtained?
I have just finished my second doctorate of ministry.
Okay, second doctorate of ministry.
I have a doctorate of ministry with an emphasis in cross-cultural communication, and I have a doctorate of ministry in church semiotics and culture.
So what has that felt like? I mean, for that experience? Maybe somebody's watching and says, man, I want to go back to school, or I've been debating if I need to go back to school or if I need to grow myself in that area. What is your encouragement on that? What is the trade-off? What's the upside? What's the downside? What have you learned in this process?
First, without question, I would encourage everyone to do that.
Yeah.
And I think there are a couple of different ways to get there. There are both the unaccredited track, which I took early in life. So I went to a denominational Bible school that wasn't accredited. After I left and moved on, years later they became accredited.
Right.
And then from there I was stuck on this unaccredited track. So I did the hard work for a master's in theology, a doctorate in ministry, and then reached a point where I just felt like I needed to go back and do this again because I wanted the accreditation.
Oh, okay.
So I did a full unaccredited track, and then I went back and started all over and did a full accredited track. I don't think everyone has to do that, but let me tell you why I did. I do a lot of work in government. So I've been privileged in
right.
Arizona to serve 4 governors over the span of about 18 years now. 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. I have led task forces. I have served on councils. I've led business in the governor's office under the state seal. And I always felt this need in my life to really substantiate the title that had been conferred upon me. And so I went back and again began the journey all over on the accredited track. I would say I learned just as much on the unaccredited track.
Right.
But when the world perceives you,
Sure.
the accreditation makes all the difference. Now, funny side story is that during all these years, when I had an unaccredited degree, the state always posted my little placard at the meetings as Dr. Crist.
Right.
I went back and got the accredited degree, showed up at the first meeting. This was under the new governor, and they had dropped the doctor and put Pastor Terry Crist. And I'm sitting there in this surreal moment thinking, boy, God keeps you humble, because all the years I had the unaccredited yet earned degree, I was Dr. Crist. I've now, reached this moment of self-fulfillment when I have the accredited degree and they strip the doctor off my name tag. And when I lead every single month now in the Child Safety and Family Empowerment Council, there's my tag right there. But I'm owning that. I'm thinking, okay, they now know I'm not, medical doctor, but I'm a pastor. And that's what I love to be more than anything, is a pastor.
Yeah. What an incredible opportunity to serve in those roles. I know when we went through Katrina in Louisiana, we were able to engage at our state level differently than just what we had done before. We were able to get a seat at the table with some food challenges in our state. And we had a seat at the table, still do have a seat at the table, church there in Louisiana, Healing Place, because of, and what a great opportunity. And what a great opportunity it's been for you to engage the community in your state at that level for child safety, is that dealing with foster care, also adoption, all those different processes of families?
Yes, I led a task force for Governor Brewer focused on 5 primary areas. And this was back in 2008 and 2009. We were coming through a period of recession, and the state had to cut $750 million out of the services budget. So her question was, how can we engage the faith-based community to help? Because one thing we know to be true, we don't always have financial resources, but we have personnel. We have faithful people who want to serve. Don't always know how, don't always know where, don't always see the pathway forward. But I know that if you tap church people on the shoulder, they're generous, as you've said. And if you show them practically how they can make a difference for the flourishing of their community, for the well-being of their family and future generations, church people step up and say, I'm here, I'm here. So that was the beginning of it. Out of that, we launched a foster care initiative called Arizona 127. We now have 100 partners, 100 churches that partner with us on that. We were awarded a commendation by Congress called the Angels in Adoption.
That's right.
So I had the privilege to receive that on behalf of our organization. And so when it comes to the issue of child well-being, foster care, adoption, families wrapping around to serve them, to provide for them, to stand with them, we have what's called Grace House, which is a counseling center for family reunification. That's a big thing that we've engaged in, not just fostering kids, not just providing for adoption, but helping families to get healthy again so they can be reunited.
Yeah, what a need right now.
Because we know that kids are always at their best in the long run in their healthy families of origin. Now, foster families are a great alternative. But if we can get a family healthy and get a kid connected and get parents engaged, then we have an opportunity to preserve that family unit that by all measures proves to be the best option for the child.
It's being that salt and light.
It is.
Which is what we're called to be in our city. And we talk about a lot at Highlands. And you probably are not going to hear a sermon from Pastor Chris in about a 4-week period. You're not going to hear about being the hands and feet of Jesus. In that community, in that neighborhood, in that workplace, in those challenging tension moments in our cities. stepping into those moments, being where we need to be, not running from it, running to it, being the hands and feet of Jesus. Now, you've just released a book that really is about that.
Exactly. I think one other thing I want to quickly just kind of squeeze in here is, I think that means showing up in a posture of humility and saying, 100%. How can I serve? Of course, you're the servolution guy, so you know, I'm talking to the OG right here. It's like witnessing to the Pope about what it means to be a good Catholic.
And you know what that feels like.
Yeah, well, I just came back from Rome, so. And I think that's real key, because in my early years, the idea was, how can I connect with the state to show them something? And then you sit there and you realize there's a level of complexity to this. I'm managing an $8 million church budget, but I'm sitting in a room now where I need to help make decisions on cutting $750 million.
That's more than trimming on the coffee on Sunday.
Wow. So, you know, you learn early on that if I'm going to be here for any length of time, which I aspire to be, I want to be a Daniel in Babylon. I want to be a Joseph in Egypt. I want to do 70 years of this, so to speak. I want to serve well. And that means, number one, being humble, being teachable, asking a lot of questions. And I've discovered that until you can articulate a person's position to their satisfaction, you haven't understood the question. So even if you disagree, there are a lot of things when you engage with the state that you don't agree with.
Oh gosh,
But you have to be able to understand what has led to the conclusion and what the logic is. And so you come in humbly, saying, how can we serve? And then from there, everything in life moves on the tracks of relationship. And so that, as we all know, is the key. Building friendships with your mayor, with your city council members. If you have an opportunity with a senator or a congressperson or a governor, you build a friendship with them. You pray for them. You send them letters of support. You tweet and at them, even when everybody comes at you saying saying happy Thanksgiving. I got it this week. I said happy Thanksgiving to our governor, who is a Democrat, and the pile-on came. Why would you say happy Thanksgiving? I'm like, why wouldn't you say happy Thanksgiving? So you build those relationships with people, and relationships more often than not lead to kingdom opportunities.
I remember early on, you know, this idea of serving our community and the serve day, the servolution. And, you know, you kind of came into it like you were Superman. Right. You know, I've got the answers. And, back away. I'm about to, you know, change the whole moment here. And then, you know, I remember thinking that way, and God dealt with me and said that S is not Superman, it's servant. So go into the meeting, go into the community, go talk to the neighborhood president, go work with that community leader, those people that are already serving, that have been there before you were there. Other great churches. That's great. Other churches in the community that have labored, that have carried the burden. Come alongside, support, be a servant, lift up Jesus. You know, it's that whole thing we say, it's amazing what can get accomplished when no one cares who gets the credit other than Christ. So we're trying to live that. And you talk a lot about that in your new book, Loving Samaritans. And so, which I think is a great title.
Thank you.
And so tell me about the book, and it's out. People can get a hold of it. We'll talk about that later. But tell me about why the title and what's the heartbeat of the book. The message.
Well, I've long been enthralled with the love affair that Jesus had with the Samaritans. And I've thought a lot about this conversation that he had with the woman at the well in Samaria in John chapter 4. I think it is a timeless model for cultural engagement. It's a picture of evangelism, but it's a picture of something a lot broader than that. And it kind of is situated back to back with Jesus interacting with Nicodemus. So Jesus is vested in two groups of people that we don't often think about: Pharisees and Samaritans. And his orientation toward them is different. His love for them is consistent. So he interacts with a Pharisee, with Nicodemus. And it's interesting to me how the religious person comes to Jesus at night and wants this quiet, clandestine sort of conversation with him. On the other hand, the woman of Samaria has this bold, open conversation. And this conversation that Jesus has with her, as we know, takes up more real estate in the Gospels than any other conversation. It is the longest recorded conversation.
I did not know that.
So if if that doesn't indicate something, we need to ask ourselves why. Why does Jesus fill so much content of Scripture with this conversation? Well, I think it speaks on a number of levels. It speaks to the fact that he's able to engage with her around the most provocative topics of the day. They talk about ethnic divisions and tensions. They talk about politics. They talk about sexuality. I mean, they cover the most provocative topics of our time. But Jesus is able to engage with her in a way that is respectful and honorable and kind and considerate and truthful. And what I come away from that with is a couple of ideas. Number one, I think all people are worthy of respect. I think all people are worthy of being heard. I think all people are worthy of hearing the truth without insult. And I think all people are worthy of unconditional love. And I think in this day of polarization and division within our communities and our families, at our Thanksgiving Day tables, it's not just what happens
around the world.
Around the world. I think if we can really come back to some clarity on what does it mean to live faithfully yet compassionately, what does it mean to live with a commitment to truth and yet being mindful of tone. Because I think that when we talk about Jesus coming full of grace and truth, you know, love holds the tension. And I think oftentimes of grace and truth as pulling a rubber band. What fills the space between grace and truth? It's love. And if we can be loving and if we can express love, but we can only do that to the degree that we know we are loved. And in loving our communities and embracing them with kindness and compassion, I think there's a lot of ground to be taken, not just for the sake of evangelism, but for the sake, again, of community flourishing. Every person I engage with is not going to come to faith in Jesus. And I lament that because I want everybody to know Jesus. But I know that they're worthy of doing the distance with. And I don't know when that day is going to happen. There's this picture in the Gospels where that Jesus is having dinner with some sinners and Pharisees. And as the Bible says, as unlikely as it seems, some of them had come to know him. How many people in our world are unlikely, but yet over time? So we write people off prematurely, and Jesus stayed with them. I saw this recently in our church with a young lady who had shared Jesus with her grandmother, and for years, her grandmother had said, I want nothing to do with your Jesus. I don't want to hear, you know, what you believe. And she stayed present, stayed faithful, stayed engaged. And in the final hours of her grandmother's life, she was given the opportunity to crawl up into the hospital bed with her grandma.
Wow.
And to lead her grandma to Jesus.
Have that moment.
And I think about, have we written people off a little too early? Because they didn't accept our message, they were hostile to our faith. You know, I really believe that the church needs to get back to loving people unconditionally. And that doesn't mean that we change what we fundamentally believe. It's all about truth and tone.
You know what I love about that, and you cover it well in this radical kindness in a us versus them world. I love that. And there's so many other things about the book, and I know you're proud of it. And of course, you've lived it. But I like it because it's not the either or.
No.
It's truth, but a good tone. It's love, but it's loyalty to Scripture. It's the gospel, but it's goodness. And I think we're living in a time where you got to be either or.
Absolutely.
It's like, well, no, I think it's both and. I think I can preach the gospel and still be good. I think I can bring the kindness of Jesus, but then also see the conviction of the Holy Spirit. It seems like that's what you're covering here. In this idea of loving our neighbor, being consistent, being present, but extending the hand.
We find it easy to other people, and we other each other. You know, there's always the other, and we have this psychological disassociation that occurs so that we never quite see ourselves like people. We are by nature tribal people,
right?
And there's nothing wrong with being in a tribe.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's a church tribe like the Ark.
Sure.
You know, Israel was a tribal nation.
Yeah.
They were one people.
Yeah.
They were one nation, but they were tribal. The problem is never with tribes. It's with tribalism. And tribalism, the isms always get us, the fundamental ism. The problem is always in the ism. And what the ism simply means is that I can't just be in a tribe with you. You have to think like me. You have to believe like me. You have to embrace everything that I believe to be appropriate. And if you don't, then I'm going to other you. And so we live in a world of othering. The Bible, on the other hand, calls us to one anothering. Not to othering,
God, that's so
but
good.
anothering. And there's a big difference between othering
Somebody's
people.
going to preach that if they hear it.
Yeah. So we can we other people who don't believe what we believe the Bible teaches about sexuality. We other people from different religions. We other people from even different denominations within the church. You know, even in our Pentecostal world,
right.
You know, are you UPC or Assemblies of God? We other each other. We are the masters of division. And I don't see that trend toward polarization changing, apart from the people of God saying, we've done this, we've set in the culture wars, and what has it produced? Has it produced a nation that loves God? So let's come back to believing what we believe, stand strong on that, but on the other hand, man, let's just love people radically and unconditionally and see what God might do through a relationship.
Yeah, that is so good. How do you feel like with a book like that and the teaching points and the different things that are around that type of project, how does somebody use it? How does the pastor use it? College leader, small group? How would you use this incredible resource, Loving Samaritans? So how would you say, hey, here's how I would use it if I'm pastoring a church,
sure,
or if I'm starting a church?
Yeah. Well, the book actually is a combination of my sort of memoirs, my experiences over the last couple of years and the journey that I've been through. But it's loaded with biblical principles that are preachable. And as a pastor, it's got to be practical and it's got to be preachable. And I think just reading through it with a marker, you're going to come out with a few sermons. You're going to come out with some opportunity for conversations.
Yeah.
And this is what I'd really love to see happen, is people just start having conversations. You know, a conversation doesn't necessarily mean you come to a conclusion.
Right.
It means you build a relationship.
Yeah.
And relationships might come to conclusions.
Sure.
But I think we need to start with the relationship.
Yeah.
And in our churches, I think if we can really model for our people what it means to have good conversations, we're equipping them in their Monday through Friday world. We're equipping them for the barbershop. We're equipping them for, you know, the office water fountain where they refill their bottle. We're equipping them for the conversation in their neighborhood. So the book is really all about how to have the kind of healthy conversations.
Like Jesus had.
Like Jesus had with the woman at the well. And I'm living this out and learning and growing in it. It's, as you know, I just came back from Rome last week. Roma. And I've been invited to the Vatican twice over a 13-month span. And it's been interesting to sit in the papal quarters with the Pope, knowing that we believe things very differently, knowing that even though he, in my presence, has professed his love for Jesus. And can I tell you how surrealistic it is to hear the Pope pray in tongues? Of course, could have been praying in Latin. No, he was actually praying.
Felt the Holy Ghost.
Actually praying in spirit. You know, he embraces. In fact, the first meeting I had with him, he wanted to talk about the Holy Spirit, wanted to talk about casting out demons.
Wow.
And I mean using the name of Jesus, not a cross and a wreath of garlic and some holy water. You know, I mean, our kind of idea on liberating the captive. And this time the conversation was a little different. But I'm sitting in that room with a few charismatic Catholics, a couple Pentecostals like me, and a couple of evangelical denominational and missional leaders. And I'm thinking, man, we believe a lot of different things in here, but we're in a conversation. And as long as we can stay involved in a conversation, God can do some surprising things through that. And what could God do in a family if we just kind of dial down the rhetoric? kind of calm down the intensity and the anger and the defensive posture that we're in. What the couple of researchers call the rigidification, where that we, through the process of othering people, we come to opinions, then we rigidify around them, then we demonize the other.
Yeah.
What if we just dialed all that down and said, okay, I'm not here to win an argument. I'm here to win a relationship and to be in the conversation, believing for God to do what grace can do.
Yeah, I remember that word grace is huge, because when we started our church in Louisiana, we were kind of on one side of Baton Rouge. It was right next to Ascension Parish.
Okay.
Very heavy Catholic parish.
Yeah.
So we launched our church, and a guy invited me to a Catholic charismatic service. Yeah. I was like, I better not go, I better not go. And man, I felt a grace to go.
Sure.
And so I loaded up one afternoon, went over there. Man, I'm in this. I didn't know what to expect. I'd been to, I was raised Catholic. My dad was Catholic, so I'd been in some Catholic environment. Only a few. We didn't go to church much.
Sure.
But man, I went in there and I'm thinking, wait a minute, is this is beyond charismatic Catholic. This is full gospel, Pentecostal, charismatic, anything you could think of. I mean, everybody was speaking in tongues. Sure. Everybody was seeking God.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there thinking, okay, God, you know more than me. You're a little bit bigger than my understanding. And to be able to see Jesus and all that, God used that with some key relationships. I remember with that gentleman, like you talked about, that I went with, we made a strong relationship. To this day, we have a relationship.
That's awesome.
I mean, here we are 30 years later, and we're still friends. Mm-hmm. Out of that, me kind of going with him, meeting him in that space, and God gave it a grace, and we were able to do some cool things. But, and that's the heart of the book. I mean, the heart is seeing people as Jesus sees them. You say that a lot.
Right, I do. I absolutely do. I think about that story and the power of collaboration. Even though we believe things differently.
Yeah.
We get that. I don't know why I always feel compelled to reaffirm that over and over and over. It's just something about, living in today's world. I just over and over. Yeah. But I believe it. And so you just feel
a lot of explanations.
A lot of explanations. But when you kind of get past that, the power of collaboration for common good.
Yeah.
And I think there are some things that most people want in common, and these are good things. We want to see our kids raised in a way that's healthy and safe, and these things that we can partner with others around in a neighborhood. But then ultimately, I want to share Jesus with people, because he's the hope of humanity. He is the doorway into a relationship with the Father. He is the Savior of the world, and there is no way to God but through Jesus. And so that's my ultimate heart. But, I don't know. I come from generations where that every one of my forebears believed that they were in the end of the world, that Jesus was coming. Right. To their surprise, they come to the conclusions of their ministry and realize, and I don't want to be the guy who comes to the end of my ministry and says, I coulda, shoulda, woulda. I was so heavenly minded, I was of no earthly good.
Yeah, right.
I was so focused on eternal matters that I failed to realize that the kingdom has come in the here and now, and the spiritual has, in fact, become the material. I want to come to the end of my days having served the purposes of God well, and I want to position the next generation to do that. If we are in the end of days, so be it. But if we're not, if we have another 20, 50, 100 years, I want the church to flourish. I want to see communities better. I want to see the people of God glorify God, and I want to see Jesus more fully formed in my grandkids and one day my great-grandkids. And I just want to see the generations get stronger, and the only way we get stronger is if we become more loving. There is a power in love that transcends everything.
Well said, my fellow brother, Pastor Terry Crist. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Yeah, pleasure.
Hey, we're so honored that you joined us on this episode here at Unscripted. If you're interested in learning more about planting a church or partnering with ARC, we'd love to get you connected. So visit our website at arcchurches.com. unscripted.com for more information. Love to have you a part of this journey. So thanks again for being here, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Unscripted.